The wind carried the smell of dust and pine when the cowboy pulled his horse to a slow walk. He had been riding since dawn, following signs most men would miss. On the flat rocks by the creek, he saw it, a dark smear where blood had dripped and spread thin under the morning sun. He swung down from the saddle, crouched low, and touched it with 2 fingers. Still tacky. Not more than a few hours old. He stood, scanning the trees. The trail wasn't much, just a faint drag mark where something, or someone, had been pulled. He followed it across the stones, up a slope where weeds grew tall. His boots pressed into the damp earth, the weight of each step careful and silent. At the crest, he saw it, a cabin broken by time and hard weather. The porch sagged, a shutter hung by a single hinge. Roof shingles were missing, leaving gaps where the sky looked down. It sat alone at the edge of the clearing, no smoke from the chimney, no sound from inside. The cowboy's hand went to the Colt at his hip. He moved toward the porch, eyes sweeping the shadows under the eaves. The blood trail ran right to the door, disappearing beneath it. He laid his palm flat against the rough wood and pushed. The door gave with a low creak, opening just enough for him to step in. The light inside was dim, filtered through warped boards that let in thin stripes of sun. There she was, a woman named Mary standing near the far wall, her hair pulled back in a loose braid, her face pale and tired. Her clothes were dusty, skirt torn at the hem. In her arms, she held a swaddled infant, 2-year-old Eliza, her head tucked under Mary's chin. Behind her, in the shadowed corner, 3 other children huddled together. The oldest, 9-year-old Jacob, clutched a broken broom handle in both hands. Beside him, 7-year-old Sarah held a dented tin cup like it could be a weapon. 4-year-old Thomas hugged a carved wooden horse tightly. Mary's eyes locked on his, sharp and full of warning. She lifted 1 finger to her lips, her head tilting just enough toward the window. "If you speak," she whispered, "the words barely sound. They'll kill us." He froze, letting his eyes adjust to the dim. Through the slit between the wall boards, he caught a glimpse of movement, a shadow crossing outside. Then the faint jingle of spurs. Someone was out there. He stepped in, closing the door without sound, his back against it. Mary shifted Eliza, her arms tightening. She nodded toward the floor. "You followed the blood?" she whispered. He gave 1 small nod. Her mouth tightened. "My brother. They shot him at the creek. He made it back here, hid something they want." "What?" he mouthed, barely moving his lips. "A ledger." She glanced toward the corner, where Jacob's eyes stayed wide and fixed on the door. "Proof of what they've done. Names. Dates. What they stole. Who they killed." The cowboy's jaw set. Outside, the spurs jingled again, followed by the slow thump of boots on the porch. He could hear them now. At least 2 voices, low but not trying to be quiet. One man laughed, the sound mean and cold. "They know you're in here," Mary said, her voice thinner now. "They'll wait if they have to." The cowboy looked at the children. Sarah stared at him, her tin cup in hand, weighing if he was danger or hope. Thomas held his wooden horse and didn't blink. Then a shadow moved across the crack of light under the door. A boot heel scuffed against the boards. "Ma'am," a voice called, smooth and oily. "We just want to talk." Mary didn't answer. The cowboy stayed still, his hand resting near his gun, but not drawing. The voice came again, closer now. "That ledger don't belong to you. Hand it over, and we'll leave you and them young uns be." A pause. The sound of the porch boards squealing under weight. The cowboy shifted his stance, just enough to angle toward the window without showing himself. Through the narrow gap, he saw the shadow of a hat brim. Another man was moving off to the side, circling. Mary's breath caught, and Eliza stirred, letting out a soft, high whimper. The cowboy's eyes flicked toward her. Mary rocked Eliza gently, her lips pressed to the tiny head, but the sound had been enough. Outside, the footsteps stopped. From the corner, Jacob gripped the broom handle tighter. Sarah's tin cup rattled faintly in her hands. The cowboy moved closer to Mary, his voice a low thread of sound only she could hear. "They're more than 2?" "3," she whispered. "One rides wide." They'll box us in. He nodded once, his mind already working the layout. Only one door. Two small windows, one in front, one in back. The walls were thin enough for bullets to pass through. The spurs jingled again, and the voice came from just outside the door. "We can wait all day, ma'am. Sun will be down before long. You know how cold it gets out here at night." The cowboy's gaze swept the room, measuring every board, every shadow. Then he looked back at Mary. "Where's the ledger?" Her eyes didn't move from his. "Safe." He didn't ask again. Outside, another laugh cut the quiet, and a jingle of spurs moved toward the side of the cabin. Mary's whisper came again, tight and sharp. "They won't stop." The cowboy nodded slowly, the decision settling in his bones. "Then neither will I." The cowboy didn't waste time. He crossed to the center of the room, keeping low, and tapped the floorboards with the heel of his boot. The sound changed over one spot, hollow. He crouched and pulled at a loose plank until it lifted free. Beneath was a dark crawl space, no more than 3 feet deep. "Down," he whispered to Mary. Jacob didn't hesitate. He slid into the opening, broom handle still in his grip. Sarah followed, clutching her tin cup. Thomas balked until Mary bent low and murmured to him. She lowered him in, his carved horse still clutched tight. Eliza was last. The cowboy took her gently, one hand steady under her head, and passed her down to Jacob. Mary eased in after them, folding her long skirt to fit. Once they were inside, the cowboy set the plank back and dragged a small rug over it. "Don't make a sound," he breathed. From outside came the crunch of boots on dirt. Someone moved toward the side of the cabin. A moment later, another set of footsteps paced along the porch. "Ma'am," the voice called again. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." The cowboy moved to the window, staying to the side where the shadow wouldn't give him away. Through the narrow slit, he saw the man, tall, broad in the shoulders, a black hat pulled low. Reed Cutter. He'd heard of him, known for killing slow when it served his purpose. Cutter turned his head slightly and spat into the dust. "Ledger don't do you no good. It'll fetch you trouble, not safety." The cowboy said nothing. A second voice carried from the far side, closer now. "Ain't no way out back. She's in there with the brats." Cutter didn't reply, but his hand rested on the butt of his revolver. Inside, the cabin felt smaller. The cowboy could hear the shallow breathing from under the floor. He crouched, pressing his hand flat against the plank to signal he was still there. Cutter stepped closer to the window, his shadow sliding across the wall. "I'll give you to the count of 5, then we start putting holes in the place." 1. The cowboy's mind raced. If they opened fire, those thin walls wouldn't hold. The cellar might protect against a glancing shot, but not if they poured lead through both sides. 2. The cowboy shifted to the front door, crouching low. 3. He caught movement in the corner of his eye. The third man, the one riding wide, was cutting back toward the cabin. That meant all 3 were close now. 4. The cowboy flexed his fingers once on the grip of his Colt. 5. Instead of gunfire, Cutter let out a laugh. "Nah, we'll wait. She'll come out. They always do." Boots thumped on the porch as Cutter stepped back. The other man's shadow moved toward the front corner, keeping low. The cowboy eased back from the door, scanning for any weak spots in the wall. The back window was small, the frame cracked, an easy point of entry if they tried. He crossed the room and pressed his ear to the boards. Nothing but wind on that side for now. A sudden clink of metal on wood came from beneath him. His pulse jumped until he realized it was Sarah's tin cup. She must have shifted in the dark. Outside, the footsteps stopped. "You hear that?" one voice said. The cowboy mouthed a curse. "Thought so," Cutter replied. "Kids don't keep still for long." The cowboy moved fast to the front window and peered out through the slit. Cutter was looking straight at the cabin, eyes narrowed. He tilted his head toward the back. The cowboy's boots made no sound as he crossed the room. He reached the rear window just as the second man's shadow fell across it. A hand tested the frame. The cowboy slid his revolver free, holding it low and steady. The shadow hesitated, then pulled back. "You alone in there, ma'am?" the voice called. Silence. He tried again, this time softer. "Ain't here to hurt the little ones. Just want the ledger." The cowboy's eyes never left the shadow. Bootsteps moved away from the window, crunching across dry grass. The cowboy exhaled slow, then stepped back to the center of the room. The voices outside dropped lower, too faint to catch. That was worse. It meant they were planning. The cowboy crouched by the floorboard again. He tapped it twice with his knuckles, then once more. A signal to Mary, "Stay ready." From under the rug, a faint tap came back. Outside, a horse shifted, its tack jingling. The cowboy pictured the men moving into position. The siege had started, and it would only end one of two ways, with them leaving alive or not at all. The cowboy knew the quiet wouldn't last. He'd been in enough standoffs to recognize the way a man's patience could turn into action without warning. He needed an edge before they made their move. He crossed to the back wall, where the boards were loose near the corner. From his saddlebag, he pulled a length of thin cord and a dented tin cup. He tied the cord to the cup's handle and fed it through the gap, letting it dangle low. A little wind or a tug from his hand would rattle it loud enough to pull a man's attention to the wrong place. When he turned back, his eyes fell on the broken broom handle Jacob had been holding earlier. He'd left it in the corner before going into the cellar. The cowboy picked it up and set it near the front door, easy to grab if he needed to bluff extra movement inside. The air in the cabin felt tight, heavy with the scent of old pine boards and dust. He moved back to the front window, crouching low so his shadow wouldn't show. Through the narrow slit, he spotted one of the men standing near the water trough, his rifle resting across his arm. The other two were nowhere in sight, which meant they were moving. A soft knock startled him, not at the door, but from under the floor. He crouched, pressing his ear to the plank. "They're close." Mary's whisper came faint and muffled. He tapped twice in answer, the sound barely louder than a breath. From outside, a low chuckle drifted through the wall. "You folks must think you're clever," a man called. "But folks hide from Cutter, they don't get far." The cowboy's jaw tightened. Cutter's name wasn't just talk. It came with a trail of graves. He slipped to the back window and eased up just enough to see. A shadow moved between the trees, the third man circling again. The cowboy gave the tin cup cord a quick pull. The cup rattled against the wall outside, sharp in the still air. It worked. The shadow turned toward the sound, boots crunching on the dry ground as he moved to investigate. That bought the cowboy a few seconds, but not much. He slid the revolver free, checked the load, and shifted back to the front. Through the knothole in one warped plank, he could see the edge of Cutter's hat. The outlaw was talking low to the man at the trough, gesturing toward the side of the cabin. The cowboy's focus sharpened. If they came from two sides, he'd have only moments to fire and move. The walls wouldn't stop a bullet, so he'd have to use timing and angle. A sudden thud made his heart jump. The sound had come from inside. Thomas's carved wooden horse slipped from his hands in the dark below. Outside, Cutter's head turned. "You hear that?" The man by the trough nodded. From inside, the cowboy stepped quickly to the center of the room, crouching over the floorboard. "Hold them still," he whispered toward the crack. No answer came, but he heard the rustle of cloth and knew Mary was pressing the children close. Boots thumped on the porch. Cutter's shadow passed across the thin light at the base of the door. "Ma'am, you don't open up, we might just open it for you." The cowboy kept low, revolver steady. From the back, the faint scrape of a boot sole against the wall told him the third man had returned. They were positioning. His eyes flicked between door and back window. If they breached, the fight would be fast and bloody. Cutter's voice came again, almost casual. "Last chance before we make this cabin our own." The cowboy slid to the side of the door, pressing his back to the wall, ready for the first breach. And then it happened. The door latch rattled. He drew in a slow breath, the revolver balanced in his hand. 1 second too soon, and he'd waste a shot. 1 second too late, and they'd be in. The latch rattled again, harder this time. Then it stopped. Outside, Cutter muttered something low, and boots stepped back onto the porch boards. The cowboy didn't relax. This was the kind of pause that came before the real move. From under the floor, Mary's voice rose in the faintest whisper, trembling but steady. "We're ready." The cowboy's reply was only 2 words, low and sure. "So am I." The first shot tore through the wall like it was paper, splinters spitting into the room. The cowboy dropped flat, the report of the rifle still echoing when a second bullet punched through, low and wide. The wood groaned under the force, the smell of burned powder drifting in. "Wake him up, boys." Cutter's voice barked from outside. The cowboy rolled to the front knothole, sighted fast, and squeezed off a single round. Through the narrow gap, he saw one of the men jerk back, clutching his shoulder. Not enough to take him out, but enough to make him wary. Silence fell for half a breath. Then Cutter laughed. "So you can shoot. Good. Means you know what happens next." The cowboy slid back to the center of the room, crouching over the floorboard. "Quiet," he whispered down to Mary. Her hand pressed up against the plank in answer. From the side of the cabin came the low scrape of something heavy being dragged. A moment later, the sharp tang of kerosene hit his nose. They weren't bluffing. He was at the back window in 2 strides. Through the warped glass, he caught sight of the third man tipping a can, dark liquid spilling across the dry board stacked near the wall. The outlaw's matchbook glinted in the dim light. The cowboy yanked the tin cup cord, rattling it loud enough to draw the man's head around. The moment of hesitation was enough. The cowboy's revolver barked, the slug slamming into the stack of boards inches from the man's hand. Chips of wood flew. The man cursed and scrambled back toward cover. That bought a little time, but not much. From the porch, Cutter called out, voice calm again. "Ledger for the lives of your little ones. You decide how much they're worth." The cowboy's gaze dropped to the floor. Under the plank, the air was already stifling. Mary, Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza pressed close, waiting. Eliza's sudden cry pierced the stillness, high and sharp. The cowboy winced. "Thought I heard a baby in there," Cutter said. "Be a shame if—" "Enough." Mary's voice rose from below, muffled but fierce. "You'll never get it." Cutter laughed, slow and low. "We'll see." The cowboy scanned a room for anything to block smoke if they lit the place. A threadbare blanket lay over a chair. He grabbed it, dumped his canteen over the fabric until it was soaked, then stuffed it along the base of the back door. He did the same at the front with an old grain sack he found under the table. It wouldn't stop a blaze, but it might hold the smoke long enough to act. A match flared outside, a tiny orange bloom in the fading light. The cowboy's stomach tightened. He moved back to the knothole, sighted, and fired. The match spun away into the dirt. The man holding it swore, his rifle clattering as he dove for cover. But Cutter didn't sound rattled. "You're buying seconds, stranger. Nothing more." The cowboy's mind worked fast. Fighting them head-on in here was suicide. He'd have to move them, all of them, before the outlaws lit the walls for real. Another shot cracked from outside, punching through the back corner. The bullet buried itself in the floor inches from the cellar opening. From beneath, Thomas whimpered. Mary hushed him quick, her voice barely carrying. Cutter's tone shifted, harder now. "Last chance. Ledger, or we burn it with you in it." The cowboy crouched, one hand pressing to the floor. "Get ready," he whispered. "We're moving." "How?" Mary's voice came back. "Creek bed out back. Low ground. They'll expect you to run for the road, not the water." She was silent a moment. "You better be right." The cowboy checked his revolver. 4 rounds left. Enough if his aim stayed clean. From outside came the clink of metal on glass. Lantern oil this time, the smell sharper. "We go on my word," he said. Outside, Cutter's voice rose one last time. "Ledger." The cowboy's answer was a shot through the wall, aimed where the voice had been. The blast sent Cutter cursing into the dirt. It wasn't a hit, but it shifted the balance. "Now," the cowboy hissed, prying the floorboard up. He reached down, lifting Eliza first, then Thomas, passing them quick to the far corner where a small rear hatch sat low to the ground. Jacob and Sarah scrambled out after them. Mary came last, The ledger's hiding place still unknown to him, and that was fine. She'd earned her secrets. Boots pounded outside as the outlaws realized the move was on. The cowboy shoved the hatch open, the scent of creek mud and pine rushing in. Go! Mary moved first, her skirts gathering dust as she slipped through the low back hatch. Eliza was clutched high against her shoulder, swaddled tightly. Jacob climbed out right after, taking Thomas's small hand in his own. Thomas moved in the sand of the dry creek bed, holding his carved wooden horse. Sarah was last, her dinted tin cup still in her grip. She ducked low and stayed close to the others. The cowboy came out behind them, shutting the hatch with a quiet shove. He dropped into the creek bed, knees bent, revolver in one hand, the other hand steady on the ground to keep from slipping. The air was cooler than the heat trapped inside the cabin, sharp with pine and damp earth. Overhead, the sky was dimming toward twilight. Keep low, stay in the shadows, he whispered, his voice calm, commanding obedience without question. They started forward, the curve of the creek giving them some cover. Grass and brush hung over the bank in places, casting deeper shade. But the cowboy knew they weren't invisible. A man who knew how to read the land could spot movement, even in low light. From behind came the shout. They're running. Cutter's voice was loud now, stripped of the fake patience he'd used earlier. The cowboy looked back. Two shapes broke from the cover near the cabin, one heading straight toward the creek bed, the other angling wide to get ahead of them. Cutter stayed near the front, rifle braced, scanning for any mistake. Keep moving, the cowboy said. Don't stop, no matter what. The creek bed dipped deeper for a stretch, its sandy bottom worn down by years of spring floods. The banks rose high enough to block the cabin from view. That was good, but it also meant the sound of their steps carried farther. The cowboy's ears picked up the hard rhythm of boots on stone. Someone was closing in fast from the side. He reached forward, touched Mary's arm. Take them ahead to that bend, he said, pointing to a curve where the cottonwoods grew thick. She nodded, passed Eliza to her other arm, and pushed on. Jacob pulled Thomas, half guiding, half carrying. Sarah trailed close, her tin cup pressed tight to her chest. The cowboy stepped out of the creek bed, up the bank into the cover of scrub willows. He crouched low, scanning through the leaves. A man burst into sight, rifle up, breath loud in the still air. His hat brim shadowed his face, but his eyes were sharp and fixed on the bend ahead. The cowboy moved first. His revolver came up smooth, and the shot cracked through the evening air. The man staggered sideways, dropping his rifle as he clutched his thigh. He went down hard in the grass, cursing. The cowboy didn't wait to see if he'd get back up. He slid back down into the creek bed, jogging to catch up with the others. He found them huddled at the bend, Mary pressed against the trunk of a wide cottonwood, her eyes scanning the trail behind him. Keep them here, he said, nodding to Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza. I'm going to hold them off. Her lips pressed tight. Don't get yourself killed. He gave her a quick nod and moved past the bend into open ground. The cottonwoods here were thick enough to break a man's sight lines, but there was a clearing just beyond, a natural choke point. If he could stop them here, they'd have a chance to reach the far end of the creek and the low ridge beyond. Cutter appeared first, his black hat low, rifle braced. The third man, the one still unhurt, flanked him on the left, moving fast through the grass. The cowboy fired first, forcing them apart. Cutter dropped behind a fallen log, while the other man dove into a patch of tall grass, vanishing from view. The cowboy kept low, moving from one tree to another, never staying in the open more than a breath. A flicker of movement in the grass drew his aim. He squeezed the trigger, the revolver barked, and the grass rustled violently before going still. Now it was just Cutter. The outlaw rose from behind the log, rifle steady. His voice carried across the clearing. You're good, stranger, but not good enough. The cowboy stayed quiet, shifting for a better angle. Cutter's voice sharpened. Give me the ledger. I'll let the woman and brats walk. The cowboy's answer was a single shot, splintering the edge of the log near Cutter's arm. Cutter fired back immediately, the round slamming into the cottonwood trunk, tearing bark inches from the cowboy's shoulder. They traded 2 more shots, each one chipping wood and kicking dirt, but neither finding its mark. The cowboy felt the weight of the revolver. Only 3 rounds left. He stepped out just enough to draw Cutter's fire, then pulled back as the bullet punched clean through where he'd been. While Cutter rechambered, the cowboy shifted low, circling right. When he came up again, he had a clear shot. He took it. Cutter's shoulder jerked back, his rifle dropping from his grip. He staggered against a log, teeth bared in pain. Before the cowboy could move in, hoofbeats thundered from the far side of the clearing. A new voice shouted, "Hold it right there." A deputy rode into view, his badge catching the last of the daylight. He reined hard, dust rising from the ground, and swung down from the saddle. His pistol was already drawn. "Reed Cutter, you're under arrest," he said, voice sharp. Cutter gave a low, bitter laugh. "Took you long enough." The deputy's eyes slid to the cowboy. "Appreciate the help. I'll take that ledger now." The cowboy didn't move. His gaze went to Mary at the bend. Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza clustered around her. The shape under her skirt hem told him the ledger was still with her, wrapped and hidden. Mary stepped forward, one arm around Eliza. In her free hand was a small bundle wrapped in cloth. She held it out. The deputy took it without a second glance, stuffing it into his saddlebag. "This'll hang him," the deputy said, jerking a thumb toward Cutter. The cowboy kept his eyes on Mary. He knew from the weight in her hand and from her steady look that what she'd handed over wasn't the real ledger. The deputy cuffed Cutter and shoved him toward his horse. "I'll see you in town," he said over his shoulder. The cowboy watched them ride away, dust trailing behind. The wounded man in the grass was gone, crawled off into the trees. The one he'd shot in the thigh was nowhere in sight. For now, the danger was past. He walked back to the bend. Mary was still there. Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza pressed close, their eyes wide in the fading light. "You kept it," he said quietly. She didn't deny it. "Some truths are too dangerous to hand over to just anyone." He nodded. "Then we better find a safe place for it. And for you." She glanced down at Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza, then back at him. "You have somewhere in mind?" "I do," he said. "But it's a long ride. We'll need to leave before first light." Her grip on Eliza tightened, but she didn't argue. Behind them, the creek bed lay still, the night settling in fast. Somewhere far off, a coyote called. The cowboy checked the sky, judged the time, and began to plan their way out. They did not sleep long. The creek bed held the night like a cool breath, but the cowboy woke them before the first blue showed in the east. The air was still. The cottonwoods whispered, then went quiet again. He listened for hooves, for metal, for the careless laugh of a man who thought he had all day. Nothing came. He helped Mary lift Eliza into the sling she had knotted from her shawl. Jacob took Thomas's hand. Sarah tucked her tin cup into her belt. They moved out. They kept to the low ground for the first mile. The creek turned to sand and then to a line of dry stones. When the land rose, he chose the folds of shadow, the places where the sage stood tall, the dips where a rider on the ridge would see only brush. Once, they stopped while a hawk cut the sky and a line of ants carried crumbs across the dust. Jacob kept Thomas from kicking them. Sarah whispered numbers under her breath and started again at 1. At the saddle of a ridge, he paused and looked back. The cabin was a dark shape in the valley, broken and small. A thin smear of smoke rose and then faded. Maybe the wounded men had crawled off. Maybe they were dead. Cutter was under the deputy's gun now. That did not settle him. He had seen men slip the noose when paper went missing or a witness lost his nerve. He looked at Mary. She lifted her chin. Her hand rested on the side of her skirt where the hidden weight rode. The ledger was there. They crossed the ridge when the light got strong enough to show their steps. On the far slope, the grass lay bent where cattle sometimes grazed. A creek ran below, this one with water in it. The cowboy let Jacob, Sarah, and Thomas drink first. He washed dust from Eliza's hair with his palm. Eliza stirred and made a small, content sound. Mary's shoulders dropped a little. "We'll reach my place by noon," he said. "It's not much. It's quiet. Quiet is more than we've had," Mary said. They walked again. Jacob asked how far noon was. The cowboy pointed to the sun and showed him where it would be when they stopped. Sarah asked if there would be a bed. He said yes, and also a table and a hearth. Thomas said horse and held up his carved toy. The cowboy nodded. "There's a real one, too. Gentle. You can brush him with your hand." They cut across a stand of pines. The smell was strong and clean. The ground turned soft with needles and did not throw sound. The cowboy kept an ear turned to the trail they had left. Once, he thought he heard a stone roll where no foot stepped, but the sound did not come again. When the trees thinned, the land opened like a book. Fenced pasture lay ahead. A weather cabin sat beyond a small yard, its roof patched with care, its door square in the frame. A short corral held a bay gelding with a white blaze. The horse lifted his head and snorted once as they came down. Mary stopped and took it in. Her eyes went to the door, to the small window, to the porch with its steady boards. Jacob, Sarah, and Thomas did not wait. Jacob walked straight to the trough and looked in. Sarah went to the steps and then looked back, asking without saying it. At Mary's nod, Sarah climbed up and turned the latch. The door did not stick. It swung smooth. Inside, the air held the faint, clean scent of pine and wood smoke. Sunlight slid across a table scarred with years of use. He put a bucket under the pump and worked the handle. The water came up cold. Sarah filled her cup and drank. Jacob washed the dust from Thomas's hands and face. Eliza woke and rooted, and Mary sat by the window and fed her. The room was small, but the light was good. The cowboy felt the knot between his shoulders loosen. "I'll bring in wood," he said. "Then we'll eat." He moved through the work in a steady rhythm that settled the room. He brought an armload of split logs and stacked them by the hearth. He carried in a sack of oats and a string of onions from the lean-to. He set a small pot of beans and one of tomatoes on the stove and lit the fire. Sarah stood on a chair and watched the blue flame turn to orange. Jacob found a broom and worked the dust from the corner as if he had always done it. Thomas sat on the floor and ran his carved horse along the grain of the boards. The little hoof marks he made only lines of air. When the food was warm, they ate at the table with the slow care of people who have not trusted a meal in days. Mary kept one arm around Eliza and fed herself with the other hand. Sarah dipped bread in the tomatoes and blew on each bite. Jacob said the beans tasted like the ones his uncle made one spring long ago. Thomas hummed and tapped his cup. The cowboy watched them and then looked down when he felt the old ache in his chest start up. He let it pass. After they ate, he lifted a small chest from under the bed and set it on the table. It held paper, a stick of graphite, a tin of ink that was dry on top but still wet below, a short knife, and a strip of flour sackcloth. He pushed the ink aside. "We make a copy," he said. Mary set Eliza in a narrow cradle he had kept for years and drew the cloth-wrapped ledger from her skirt. The wrap was tied with a careful knot. She untied it and laid the book on the table. It was bound in rough canvas, the corners worn smooth with use. On the first page, hand after hand had written names, places, dates, sums. Some lines were small and careful. Some were rough. All of them ran true in a straight march down the page. "You can write," Mary said. "I can," he said. "Slow. Good enough." She sat beside him and read the lines out. He wrote each as she spoke it. He kept the letters even and the numbers plain. When the ink dragged, he sharpened the graphite and went on. Sarah stood by the corner of the table and watched until her eyes grew heavy. Jacob took Thomas out to the porch and showed him how to pour water from cup to cup without spilling. Eliza slept and startled and slept again. By afternoon, they had copied the first half. He closed the new pages in the cloth to keep them clean. He wiped ink from his fingers with a rag. "How many names?" he asked. "Enough," Mary said. "Enough to put him where he cannot write out." He nodded. "We'll send one set by a man who does not drink to a judge who does not sell. I know a male writer who owes me. He'll Take it. We'll keep the other set here." And the one the deputy took. "It will keep him busy," he said. "It will get people talking. But we will not depend on him." She watched his face as he spoke. He did not look away. After a moment, she folded the ledger back in its cloth and tied it again. "I have hidden books under boards before," she said. "They always find a loose plank first." He put the small chest away and lifted the corner of the hearthstone with the short bar he kept behind the stove. Beneath was a dry hollow packed with ash and hard dirt. "Here," he said. They would have to tear the room apart to find it. Mary slid the wrapped copy into the hollow. He eased the stone back, set it by feel, then scuffed a bit of ash across the seam so it looked as it always had. When he stood, the room felt different. Not larger, not smaller, just steadier. In the late afternoon, he walked the fence line with Jacob and showed him where the wire had slackened and where the post leaned. He taught him to twist the wire with a small stick to pull it tight. Jacob's hands were quick. At the corner by the cottonwood, they found a nest blown down in the last wind. Jacob set it back on a branch and said maybe the bird would use it again. Maybe, the cowboy said. He did not say that some things, once broken, did not hold the same. Jacob smiled anyway and talked about the time he would ride the bay gelding. Back at the cabin, Sarah stood on the porch stoop and counted the pines. She got to 12 and then started over. Thomas had found a flat board and was pushing his wooden horse over it again and again the way a child will test the same path until he knows it with his eyes closed. Mary had washed the plates and set them to dry. She was humming under her breath, not a song he knew, just a small sound to keep the air warm. As the sun leaned toward the west, he brought out a small sack. Inside were shoes, child-sized, the leather worn but sound, the soles patched. He set them on the bed. Sarah saw them first. She touched the stitching and looked up fast, as if to ask if they were real and for her. He nodded. She pulled them on and stamped once and laughed small and bright. Jacob helped Thomas into the other pair. Jacob's own boots were too big and would be for a while yet. The cowboy made a note in his head to look in town for a size that would not throw Jacob when he ran. When the light turned soft, he lit the lamp. The room held a gold quiet. He set a small pot with apple slices to warm and sprinkled a pinch of sugar he had saved. The smell filled the cabin at once. Thomas clapped. Sarah closed her eyes and smiled. Jacob said nothing but sat near the table. They ate the apples with spoons and then went back to the work that comes at the end of a day. He carried in wood. Mary folded the rag she had used to dry the plates. Sarah stacked cups. Jacob took the broom to the small pile of dust Thomas had made by the door. Eliza woke and fussed. Mary lifted her, and the fuss stopped. He stepped out to the porch and looked at the sky. The wind had shifted. It had a cool edge now and a weight to it that spoke of rain. He watched the line where the plains met the low hills. No dust rose there. No riders cut across. He checked the latch and the hinges and the corner where the porch had once sagged and now held firm. Then he went back inside. Mary was at the table with Eliza against her shoulder. He stood across from her and rested his hand on the worn edge of the wood. "You can stay," he said. His voice was steady. It was not an order. It was not a plea. Not for a night. For as long as you choose. Mary looked down at Eliza and then at Jacob, Sarah, and Thomas by the hearth. Jacob was whittling a stick into a straight line the way boys do when they want to be useful. Sarah was fitting the tin cups into one another. Thomas had set his horse on the cradle and was patting its back like a real mane. The fire made a low sound. The room smelled of apples and pine. "What does stay mean?" Mary asked. She did not say the words like a test. She said them so the shape of them would fit in the room. "It means this is your home too," he said. "You cook if you want to or don't. I bring wood and water either way. We fix the roof when it leaks. We mend fence. We keep a place for them to sleep and eat and not be afraid. We keep watch. We tell the truth we can and hold the rest safe until it can stand in light. And what do you ask in return?" she said. "That you do not look away," he said. She held his gaze for a long breath. Then the corner of her mouth turned the smallest bit. She set Eliza in the cradle. She crossed to him and put her hand on the same table edge where his rested. The wood was warm under both their palms. "Then we stay," Mary said. Jacob looked up. Sarah did too. Thomas did not. He was busy making the horse drink from a cup that had no water in it. Eliza let out a sleep sigh. He felt something ease in him that had been tight for a long time. He did not move to pull her close. They did not need that to mark the thing. It was already marked in the work they had done, in the pages they had copied, in the stone they had set back in place. Later, when Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza were in the bed and the cradle and the small pallet by the hearth, he brought out a blanket for the loft. "I'll take the top," he said. Mary shook her head. "You'll sleep," she said, "where you always sleep." It was not a test. It was not a tease. It was a simple line laid in the room that said he had not been pushed out of his own life. He nodded and took the chair by the hearth like he had on many nights. He set his hat on his knee and watched the fire find a slow, steady burn. Rain came after midnight. It started as a soft ticking on the roof and grew to a straight, strong wash that beat the dust down. The smell came through the cracks like something clean. Jacob, Sarah, Thomas, and Eliza slept on. Once, Eliza stirred and Mary rose and then lay down again. He kept his seat. He had sat in worse places to keep watch. At first light, the rain turned to a fine mist. He stepped onto the porch and scanned the edge of the land. The world looked washed and new. He did not trust that look, but he let it stand for what it was, a morning that did not hold gunfire. They ate bread and apples and drank coffee that he cut with milk for Sarah and Jacob. Thomas got warm water and did not care. He liked the cup. Eliza fed and slept. He saddled the gelding and left him at the rail. He stacked wood to dry where the eaves gave shelter. He checked the latch one more time. Before noon, he rode into town alone. He took the wrapped copy of the ledger pages, not the original. He put them in a second cloth and tied it tight and tucked it under his coat. He did not go to the sheriff. He went to the livery where a male rider slept on a cot between runs. The man woke fast and clear. The cowboy put the cloth in his hands and spoke two names: a judge on the circuit and a preacher in the next county who did not play cards and did not drink and did not smile when men lied. The rider nodded and said he would leave by evening. The cowboy paid him in silver and in an old favor that did not need words. Then he rode back. In town, two women stood by the mercantile and watched him pass. One whispered. The other folded her arms. He did not slow. He did not let their talk fit inside his day. At the far end, he saw the deputy lead Cutter into the small jail. The outlaw's arm was in a sling. Cutter lifted his head and stared at him with a cold look that did not hold power now. The cowboy met it and then set it down. He had other work. When he reached the cabin, Thomas ran to the door and said, "Horse," the way a child says a word that can cover 1,000 things. Sarah held up her shoes. Jacob asked if the fence held. Mary looked for the line of his mouth and read what she needed there. He told her the pages were on their way. He told her they would keep the original until a judge he trusted stood in front of them and asked for it by name. She nodded and set a pot on the stove. He took off his hat and set it on the peg. That evening, he carved a thin strip of wood into a small new shape and smoothed its edges with the back of his knife. He made another horse. He set it on the table. Sarah picked it up and set it next to the first. Jacob lined them nose to tail and said it looked like a herd. Thomas tried to make them climb the back of the chair. Mary smiled just a little. They lit the fire and ate a simple meal. After, they all stepped onto the porch and watched the last light run out over the wet grass. The sky held a clear band in the west. The air was easy. The land lay open and honest. The wind carried the smell of rain that had already fallen and pine that would always be there. The cowboy stood with his shoulder against the post. Mary stood with her hand on the rail. Jacob, Sarah, and Thomas leaned where they could see the most. Inside, the cradle waited close to the bed, close to the hearth. "It isn't much," he said. "It's ours," Mary said. He did not say, "We'll be safe forever." He did not make a promise no man can hold. He said only what was true. "We choose this," he said. Mary nodded. We choose this. The house did not grow bigger. The land did not move. The danger in the world did not vanish. But the shape of their days had changed. They had a place to stand, and they stood there. And when Eliza shifted and let out a small sound, and Thomas laughed, and Jacob said the fence would hold through the first snow, and Sarah counted past 12 without starting over, it was enough. They went inside. The door closed. The latch caught. The fire held. And for the first time in a long time, all of them slept knowing morning would come and find them still together.